All right, welcome. So in this video, I wanted to go ahead and make a very basic introduction to music theory and the rules and conventions that we follow when we write modern music. And this type of music could be for a web game, this could be some form of artistic expression. It's not really important what the type of music is, but what we want to go ahead and review today is the basic ideas behind how we can write music according to a set of rules and conventions such that the music will sound good. Now, coming from the realm of computer science, typically we have been working in a very technical sense. Everything that we've been doing and looking at is very cut and dry. And now we're going to sort of step outside into the world of art where we use terms like the word good that don't really have a technical, well-defined meaning, and in fact are very subjective in what they mean for different people. Um, but in the context of this video, there is a widely accepted way in which we can write music such that it will sound good and pleasing to the human ear. And so this video is just going to be a very basic and quick introduction to how we can quickly get some free software and start writing music for ourselves or our tools or our applications. And so hopefully we will be successful in achieving that goal. So first off, credit where credit is due. Here we have Johann Sebastian Bach. Now everyone, maybe most people are familiar with Bach's music, even if you don't know that he specifically wrote it. But Bach is widely considered to be one of the most prolific composers of all time. And there are many reasons for that, but prior to Bach's era, music was largely written in a sense that there wasn't a lot of structure or any convention to it. It was a lot of Gregorian chants that were used in church hymns, and this music was really just written according to sort of trial and error and what seemed to flow naturally, you know, according to the task at hand, which, as stated previously, was mostly written for hymns and church music. So Bach was really the first noted composer who invented and developed a set of rules and conventions that were used to write music in a way such that if these rules were followed, you could reliably compose and write music that sounded, again, good. So Bach is hugely influential in the Western sphere of music. There is another sort of sphere of music outside of Western music that uses different rules and conventions and specifically tuning systems that's outside of the scope of this video, but what we're going to be discussing here is Bach's influence on Western music in general, and that's everything from classical to jazz to hip-hop. Everything draws from these sort of initial set of conventions that Bach developed. In the case of jazz and hip-hop and rap, those styles of music break the conventions that Bach developed, but they still rely on those conventions existing in order to be broken in the first place, as those forms of music were sort of developed as a form of protest. So we had an introduction to the idea that there exists some sort of structure or sequence that we can play sounds in to achieve music that sounds good or pleasing to the human ear. So the video here is really geared towards the person who is maybe coming from a place where they've never written music before or never seen a keyboard or had a chance to try their hand at composition. So we're going to go over very quickly the piano keyboard here and what it is and how we should be looking at it in the context of this video. So note that what we have here is a set of letters, and these letters are the names of the key, and they correspond to this sheet music down here. Now, one thing I do want to say about this video is we're not going to be really living in the world of sheet music down here, and there are going to be some components of music theory that will be omitted from this video just for the sake of staying within the scope of keeping this as basic and direct as possible, towards helping us get to kind of this final result of being able to write something that sounds good and developed. So what I want to do here is kind of focus on this keyboard really quickly. Now, if we look, what we'll note really quickly is that there is, like I said, names for each of these keys. And if we notice here, we start at C, and then we see C again, and then we see it a third time. Now, this is a little bit of foreshadowing for something that we're going to be reviewing in some future slides down the road. But what I want to point out to you really quickly is that this is a grouping of notes, right? And in fact, one group that we're going to pay attention to is from C to C right here. Now, this is called middle C because it's the middle C on your piano or on your keyboard. As you can see, it's about in the middle right here. But from here to here is actually what we would call a scale. Now, a scale is a group of notes, and as long as we keep ourselves inside of this group of notes, we can follow a set of rules and patterns that if we play a note, and then if we play another given note in a prescribed fashion, we can actually begin to write music that will, again, sound good according to the rules that we're defining for ourselves. Now, one thing we can do is we can also just choose to play random keys. Sometimes it sounds good, sometimes it doesn't sound good. And that's sort of the trial and error process that I was, sort of alluding to earlier. And in the context of the rules that we have described here, we want to stay within the prescribed order. Now, in jazz, we can break outside of that order, but really what we're doing is we're creating a different set of rules that are directly contrasting the sort of foundation that we have here. And we're not necessarily going to go into the jazz world in this video here, but for our purposes, we're just going to concern ourselves with these notes here. And we're only really going to be looking at these white notes from C to C. And it turns out that this is actually a scale called the C major scale, which we'll take a look at in a future slide. Okay, great. So what I have open in front of us right now is a piece of software called GarageBand. And this is a free piece of software that you can get on any Apple computer. Something I want to point out to you really quickly, though, is this is an example of a DAW, a D-A-W DAW, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation. And much like your IDE that you would use to write code, if you're coming from the software world, the language that is used to operate this piece of software is largely the same across any pieces of software. And so there are DAWs that exist for basically any computing system. Reaper is an example that exists for Linux. You have many options available on Windows, and Mac has plenty of options as well that actually function really, really well in my opinion. So what we're looking at in front of us here is GarageBand with our classical grand piano open, and this instrument will actually open itself the first time you open the application. And I believe GarageBand is available for iPhones as well. So really quickly, I just want to show you an example of what happens when we just sort of like poke around the keyboard and try to just play some random notes without any idea of like, a set of rules or structure that we could maybe follow to sort of like play notes that might sound good in sequence, right? So if you remember when we were looking at our example in the previous slide, we had a picture of a keyboard with C, C, and C, right? And so we're just kind of concerning ourselves with these notes here in between the C's. And in fact, we're actually going to go from this C to this C right here. Now, you'll notice these sounds actually sound very, very similar to each other. I'll play them again. And the reason for that is that's because they are actually the same note. Just because they're on different parts of the keyboard just means that if you notice, one is lower and one is higher. But these are actually the same note, just different pitch. And those are called octaves. An octave is when you have one note and then you have the same note again, but at a higher pitch. Now, all of these notes here in between the octaves are called the C major scale, just these white notes right here. And these are the ones that we're going to be concerning ourselves with, mainly because it's very easy to remember. We only have to play these white notes here to stay inside of that scale, right? So I'm going to play the notes in the C major scale for you. And that is the C major scale. So those are the notes that we're going to be using. Now, notice that we can basically very easily and quickly kind of jump around the C major scale and play any note, and we might sort of have, you know, the beginnings of a song here. For example, now I didn't have that planned in any way. I just sort of like chose those notes at random as I was clicking around the keyboard, and we can really do that kind of to our heart's desire here. And that doesn't sound immediately horrible to the human ear. That actually sounds like, you know, some semblance of a song or something resembling a very basic, you know, song. Now, what our goal is to do is to find some sort of pattern that we can follow such that when I play this note, for instance, it would be really nice if I knew if there was some set of rules that would tell me which note I could play next that would help me write music in such a way that it sounded good. And it turns out that there is a very specific and prescribed sequence that we can follow in order to do that. Before we do that, though, I just want to point something out to you. Here, I've only been playing one note at a time. And that's mostly because I don't actually have a physical keyboard in front of me, I just have my mouse and keyboard. But it turns out that we can actually combine different notes together and play them at the same time. And what this ends up doing is helping us create a very complete and rich sounding piece of music, because we're filling out all the different spectrums of sort of the sounds that are being played. When we just play it sort of by itself, it's not horrible. But in my opinion, it leaves a lot to be desired. It feels like we could go and we could fill out a lot more space, and we can achieve this by playing multiple notes at the same time. All right, so let's talk about chords. Now, what we were just discussing in the previous section was the fact that we can, to our heart's desire, play any single note to any extent, really. But if we want to fill out the sound and the song that we're trying to create, it's actually very helpful and much more complete to play groups of notes together. Now, remember, we're just concerning ourselves with those white keys, right? So that's going to be C all the way up to this other C here, which is unlabeled, but this is the group of notes that we were paying attention to. Now, notice here, first of all, what I want to do is just point out that this grouping of notes in the context of music and music theory is called a chord, right? And typically a chord is going to be any grouping of notes greater than or equal to 2, but generally when we speak about it in context of the piano, we're talking about groups of 3 notes, right? And then when we move into the jazz world, we'll start seeing groupings of additional notes like 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, all sorts of combinations. But just for our purposes here, we're only going to be concerning ourselves with 3 notes at a time. Now, again, we're in the C major scale, only looking at the white keys right here. And our first chord that we can play and pay attention to is called the C major chord. Don't necessarily concern yourself with the major here. That does mean something, and it's very important, and we'll kind of point it out later on as we move forward. But for now, what I just want to point out to you is that we're going to focus on chords in the context of 3 notes. Now, if you look, we can see a pretty basic pattern going on here. We start with C, which is the name of our scale. It's the C major scale. And we're going to play the first chord of C. So that starts with C, and then all we need to do to get to the next note is just skip one. So you'll see that each of these is just every other note, right? And this is our C major chord, is that we play C, E, and G. It's not super necessary in the context of this video here to concern ourselves with all of the letters of the keys, but it is very important and critical to understanding music as a whole. But again, just for the context of this video, we can gain a pretty high level understanding without concerning ourselves necessarily with the names of the notes, right? All we want to really do is just look at this pattern here and notice that if we play every other key on the keyboard, we in fact do find ourselves playing a proper chord together. Now, revisiting the idea that sort of defines this video is that there is a sequence or a set of rules in which we can play these chords. Now notice we're on the C major chord right here, but it turns out that there are other chords that exist on this scale as well that we'll go ahead and explore here in a moment. But just like there is a rule, there are rules and prescribed sequence to how we can play notes in a particular order, there is in fact rules and prescribed sequence to how we play groups of notes together. And this is the idea that really is going to underpin this entire video, is that when we go and we play 3 notes together here, the next 3 notes that we decide to play are essentially chosen for us by what Bach discovered and developed, which is called the harmonic sequence, which we will explore in a future slide. But for now, what I want to do is move on and show you exactly what these grouping of notes can sound like when we play them together on a piano. Okay, and so we're back in GarageBand, and if you noticed earlier, you may have noticed these green boxes at the top. And this is where we're actually going to be storing the notes that we want this piece of software to play as we write our music. Now, in order to create these boxes, this is going to be GarageBand specific, and again, the language around this is going to change a little bit depending on which piece of software that you're using, but the idea is roughly the same, and you should see the same mechanics in play no matter what piece of software you choose to write your music. So what we're going to do down here, you'll notice that we have another piano, and if I want to start writing notes that we can play in this piece of software, what I'm going to go ahead and do is right click, and that gives me an option to edit. Now when I click that, there is a famous quote that says that if painting is our way of decorating a canvas, then music is our way of decorating time. And this is absolutely true if we look at this grid and think of it as a canvas. Each one of these little squares that we see here represents a discrete unit of time, and these are called beats. Now, how we define the time and pacing of a music, these are settings that we just sort of decide depending on how we feel or how we want the music to feel as we're writing it. And in the context of this piece, we're just going to use the basic settings that are given to us by GarageBand, and it will play the notes for us in a very prescribed amount of time depending on how we write them here. But time is very, very important, and we can control it easily within this piece of software. Now, I want to show you what it sounds like both when we play individual notes in sequence, but also when we play chords or groups of individual notes in sequence. Now inside of GarageBand, if I want to start writing notes, what I'm going to go here and do is click on this pencil, and I'm going to drag it over so that it's locked like this. Now you'll notice everything kind of changed color a little bit, and that means what we're ready to do here is start inserting notes onto our canvas. Now I want you to take a quick second and sort of think to yourself about where we might start writing the notes as far as looking at these keys right here. We've gone over it several times about what sort of keys we're confining ourselves to within the context of this video, but if you're astute, you'll notice that we're probably going to start right here because we're in the C major scale, and we're only concerning ourselves with the notes in between C, and specifically just the white notes in this sequence here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is come down here, and I'm going to click, and you'll see that GarageBand has now inserted a note onto our canvas here. Now it's a little bit short, and just for the purpose of this video, without thinking too hard about it, what I want to do is go ahead and take the end of it, and we're going to drag it out. Do that again right here. I think when you hold it down, it zooms in for you. So now we have this note here, and really what we've done is we've created a nice little green square of which we can write notes in. Now if I want to play this note, what I can go ahead and do is I can just press the space bar on my computer. Great. And you'll see that GarageBand has played the note for us after we press the space bar. Now you'll also notice that this little ticker here has moved down, and it moves down at a certain speed. Now if we want, we can actually change the speed at which this ticker, this sort of like play bar here, moves. But for right now, in the context of what we're doing, we just want to sort of demonstrate the sort of basic settings that we're given here. And I believe that it is set to 120 beats per minute, which is the same unit of time that your heartbeats are counted. But again, we're probably just going to leave it at that for the context of this video here. So we've played one note here. Now, what if I want to add in another note? Now, it turns out I can do that very easily just by going and holding down, going back to my pencil here and clicking that, and then just clicking anywhere on our canvas here and putting the note where I want it. Now, notice that we started this note here and we're sort of like within this nice little box. So to keep things clean and tidy, I'm just going to go ahead and add another note right here. I'm going to drag it out to the end, and I'm going to press enter on my keyboard. Now that brings me back to the start of this box here. If I want to play both of these notes in sequence, I'm just going to press enter again, and that brings me back to the very beginning. Now if I press space, great. Now we're starting to write a song. So these are just single notes, and once again we can play single notes all day to our heart's desire. Let's go ahead and add in another note. So remember when we were talking about a chord, what we can do is we can skip notes. And a chord is made of just every other note, remember? So that would be this one, and then this one. That is in fact a chord. So what I'm going to do, if I hold down Control and I click the note, that actually makes it disappear. So I'm going to individually play all of the notes of the chord that we were just looking at a second ago. So remember, that's skipping notes on the keyboard. So we're going to be here, we're going to move to this one, and we're going to skip it. Now we're on this note here. So I'm going to put a note right here on the canvas. Great. Perfect. What's the next note? So if we're skipping and we're just taking every other one, we want this one, and we want this one, and then we want this one. So I'm going to go over here, and now we have all the notes in our chord. And we just went every other note, just like that. Now I'm going to send my cursor ticker here back to the very beginning by pressing enter. And so now we're at the beginning of the song, and let's go ahead and press space. Great. And so these are the three notes of the chord. Note, though, that we played them individually. We left our audience wanting. They want a more complete sounding piece of music. And so what we'll go ahead and do now is we're going to combine these notes and write our first chord. So I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard and click this note to remove it. Do that again here. And then we're just going to go back to the very beginning of our track. And we're going to start at this note. Now we're writing a chord, which means we're going to skip every note on the keyboard, every other note, sorry. So we're going to go C, we're going to skip that one, and we're going to write this one here. And then we're going to go back up here, skip it, and go here. Great. These are the same notes that we just played and had spread out over our canvas, but now we've placed them on top of each other, and GarageBand will go ahead and automatically play all of these at the same time for us. So I'm going to send our cursor back to the very beginning, and we're going to press play and see what it sounds like. Very interesting. Now we have a much more complete and full sounding series of notes here. Now, why were these the right notes to choose? I want to do something really quickly and create something that might not sound so pleasing to the human ear. So let's try this. Let's break the rules that I just sort of developed for us here, and let's see what that sounds like. So what if I take a note and put it here? And then let's say I just go up to this one right next to it. Okay, already sounding a bit troubling. And then let's go to this note right here and see Let's add it in. Great. So we have a grouping of notes here. Let's play these in sequence and see what it sounds like to our ear. I go back to the beginning and I'm going to press space. Interesting. Very interesting. Now, I don't know about you, but again, we're in the abstract art world, and different things might sound good to different people. What we just did here did not sound very good to me, and that's because we broke the rules that sort of exist that we are going to sort of learn more about here. But this is not a chord. This is just some random grouping of notes that isn't following our prescribed sequence. And I've said it once before and I'll say it again. When you get into the jazz world, there is a way to take something like this and make it sound really cool, but we're not in jazz world right now. We're just in the very basic introductory music theory world. So I'm going to go ahead and pretend like this never happened. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to write a different chord. And I'm going to follow a pattern here that we can sort of easily look at. And it may not be clear immediately what I'm doing, but I'm going to write another chord that will in fact sound much more pleasing to the human ear when we play it in a certain sequence. So let's take a look at this note right here. This is the third note of our chord. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to create another one right here. So I'm holding Control and I'm going to click. Great. Let's follow our pattern of chords that we have developed earlier. So we have this one. We're going to go to this note and we're going to skip it and go up to this note here. I'm going to press Control and click. And then we're going to go back to the keyboard. We're going to go here and notice that we are breaking out of our sort of grouping of notes here, but these notes end up just repeating. So technically we're still within this group of notes, they're just getting a little bit higher. That's it. Remember, these are the same. This C and this C are the same note, they're just one's lower and one's higher. So we're here, and I'm going to go ahead and go here, skip, and then we're going to put a note right here. Now let's go ahead and play this and see what it sounds like. Maybe we can redeem ourselves from our mistake that we made earlier. Very interesting. So now we have something that sounds like it's progressing in the general sense of how we might experience music. Now, what I have done here is I have taken a chord and I have played another chord. There is, as we've been alluding to this entire video, there is a set of rules as to how we should do this, and I'm making, finger quotes here because again, those rules can be broken when we move into different styles of music such as jazz or more contemporary forms. But for now, if we follow the set of rules and place our chords on the canvas in a very specific way, we can start to write music that's going to progress and sound like we're actually trying to go somewhere, maybe tell a story or something. So let's return to the slides and go ahead and dig a little bit deeper into this structure here and how it was we were able to write this and start to actually create a piece of music. Okay, and we're back in our slide here. So what I want to point out to you is that we have this picture here, which is, this is called the staff, and it's not too terribly different from the grid that we were just looking at. It's very similar to that canvas, and really what we have here is a very similar system of how our notes are laid out. So what we did in GarageBand was we started with a note and chord, and in specific we started with this one here. So again, we were in the C major grouping of notes, and so we played the first chord of that grouping of notes, and so we started with this one right here. And then we really just kind of went a little crazy for a second and played some weird collection of things that didn't sound very good. And in a reversal, we realized that was, a huge mistake, so we deleted it, and what we did instead was we moved on and we played a different grouping of notes, which in turn did sound much better to our ears when we played it in a specific sequence. Remember, that chord that we wrote the first note of that chord started with the last note of this one here. And remember that in order to write a chord, we're just skipping the notes. We just use every other one, and that's what this picture is representing here. So what I want to point out to you about this picture is the numbers, okay? Now, these numbers are very important, and this is how we're going to sort of build, a sequence or a prescribed set of rules about how we should play these chords, because we can look at these numbers essentially and say like, well, if I start at 1, the rule says that I can, in theory, move to any of these, but it's going to sound really good if I go to 5. And then if I'm at 5, we'll have a different set of rules, much like an if-else statement saying that I can go to any of these, but really it's going to sound really good if I go to this one or potentially this one right here, right? So notice that there are 7 chords here, and we're not necessarily paying attention to the case of these letters here. These are Roman numerals representing the numbers 1 through 7, and you'll notice that they are different cases, and that does mean something, and it's very important. But just for right now, we're just going to focus on the fact that these are the numbers 1 through 7. Why is 8 skipped? Well, there is no 8. It turns out that this is just the same as this. This is a C right here, and then this is the same C, just a little bit higher, right? So it just repeats. We're really just concerning ourselves with 1 through 7, okay? All right, so at long last, we have come to the moment where we can start to define rules about our chords. And that is really going to be highlighted in this diagram right here. Now, again, to the person who is unfamiliar with music theory and has not written a song or had much experience with composition, this might look totally insane and crazy, but really, I don't want us to be super intimidated by this. This is really just a flow chart that's telling us the rules of how we can play music such that it will sound good. And this was Bach's chief innovation and contribution to music composition at the time. Prior to Bach, this type of structure had never existed before, and when people were writing music at the time, it was really just, you know, trial by error and just see like what didn't sound horrible. But when Bach came along, he noticed that there was indeed a pattern to how certain chords were played such that it could come out and sound pleasing to the ear. Now, if we follow this flow chart here, we can follow those rules and we can start to actually write real pieces of music. In the context of chords, that's what these numbers are referring to here. So let's just get started and take a look at this diagram. I want to start here at chord number 1. So this corresponds directly to this chord right here, and this is where we start. It might seem a bit counterintuitive, but you'll notice that if we start on the 1 chord, it's showing up here at the end of our flowchart with an arrow pointing off into who knows what. So let's kind of interpret this and break down what's happening. Let's say we decide to start at our 1 chord as the first chord in our song, right? What this arrow is indicating is that according to this set of rules, it is totally legal and fine for you to start at 1 and then move to any of these chords that you see in this diagram. I mean, so let's look up here and see what that really means. So if I start here, that means it's totally fine for me to go here. I could go here. I could go here, et cetera, et cetera. I could go to any of these notes here. It is also possible for me to go here to number 8, although there are a sort of like unwritten set of nuanced rules that says that this is not really good form to do that. We want to keep things like, you know, exciting and interesting. And if we just kind of like play the same notes and then go and play the same notes again, that's not super unique and interesting. And according to this sort of like unwritten conventions, we want to keep things kind of interesting. So going from 1 to, again, this is 1, is not considered good form. But what we can do is we can start at 1, and we could, for instance, go to 3, right? Now, let's say that we're at 3. Just take a quick look at this flowchart and see if you can sort of understand where it's telling us that we can go next, right? I mean, it's not too simple, it's not too difficult to see that we can start at 3 and then go to 6, or we could be at 3 and we could go to 4. Let's just kind of, you know, go down the rabbit hole and see where this takes us. So now we're at 4, which is up here. Where is it that we are allowed to go next? Well, if we look at this flowchart, it is only possible for us to go from 3 to 4 back down to 2. This is the rules. This is the flowchart, and this is the convention right here that we're going to base a song off of when we go ahead and write it. And this chart here, this defines Western music. Everyone from Bach to Lady Gaga to Louis Armstrong, everyone follows this sort of pattern to some extent when we're writing music within the Western tuning scale, which really is this set of notes here. Okay, and so we're back in GarageBand, and what we want to do is we want to start to write a piece of music that is going to follow the pattern that we have just prescribed here. So let's go back really quickly and take a look. Okay, so we're looking at this diagram here. Now, if we go back, you'll notice that I am starting at C, and so we already have a 1 chord here. So we're just going to start at 1 just for the sake of simplicity. So let's go ahead and go back to our flowchart. Now, remember that the rule as follows is that if you start at 1, you're allowed to move to any of these chords within the key. And so what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and start at 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just go ahead and move to 5. Now, that's what we had written before, but I'm going to go ahead and go back and put those notes in. Here. Holding Control down, I'm going to click. Okay, and we're going to skip and just go here. Going to skip and just go here. Great. So, what did we do? So let's just go ahead and I want to show you something really quickly. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So this is 1 right here, which is the 1 chord that we started. Now which note does this start on relative to C, which is the key or the scale that we're in? So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. This is the 5 chord right here. We went 1. Great. So we have 1 and then we have 5. Let's just go back really quickly. Right. So let's sort of dissect this diagram and sort of see what this is telling us here. So we started at 1 and we went to 5, but you'll notice that there is a box around these two numbers right here, with both of them pointing to each other, but don't worry about that right now. So we have this box, and what does that mean? Well, that means that both of these chords inside of this box follow this pattern right here, and really any arrow that points to, but right now this arrow is pointing back here to 6. So according to this chart and these rules here, we should start at 1, and then we go to 5, and then 5, the only chord that 5 is allowed to move to and still sound good is either 7 or 6. If it goes to 7, there's another sort of hidden convention that tells us that that's something that sounds really good towards the end of the song. It builds tension, and it's sort of used as a good transition to move on to a different piece or to potentially end the piece. But what we'll do is we'll go from 1, we'll go to 5, looking at our box here, where are we allowed to go? We're allowed to go to 6. So let's go ahead and go back to GarageBand, and we're going to go ahead and write a 6. Now, this is very easy for us to do because, again, we're just living in the land of white keys right now. So if this is 5, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then this must be 6. So let's go ahead and go over here, and I'll put a 6 right here, holding Control, clicking. Great. We're going to skip, and we're right here, and we're going to skip, and we're right here. Yes, okay, great. Now, let's just take a moment and see what our song, or what our sequence, sounds like. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the beginning, and I'm going to press play. Great. Sounds like, a foundation for a piece of music. We're filling out all of the different, what we would call voices in the scale, and we're starting to actually move forward with an actual progression or a sequence of music. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is keep going. Let's go back to our diagram. Great. So we went from 1, and then we went to 5. We looked at the flow chart and the box. 5 said that we can go to 6. Really easy for us to look at 6 and see where it's pointing to. Well, it's pointing to another box. We could go to 4, or we could go to 2. As I said, there were some hidden conventions about which one of these might be a little bit better to go to. Let's just keep things really simple here, and let's go to 4. Okay? So let's go ahead and go back. Great. Now, it's pretty simple for us to look and say, well, if this is 5 here, then this one here might be 4. And let's confirm if that's true. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, so that's going to be this key. So let's go ahead and go down here, and I'm going to place a note right here. Right, let's write out the rest of the chord. So we're just skipping, and we're going here. You'll notice that these are the same, And it turns out that that actually does sort of play into why these sound good when you play them after each other, but we're not going to dive super deep into that here. So we wrote this one, and let's go ahead and write the next voice. So that's this one, and we're going to go back over here, and we're going to put a note. Let's go ahead and play that and see what it sounds like. So we have, we have this one, and this one. Great. Let's see what our song sounds like as it is. Press enter to get all the way back to the beginning, and then space to play the song. Very, very interesting. So let's just take a quick recap and review what we've done. We've come back and we found our flowchart here, and we basically did the following. We started at 1, this one right here, and 1 says that we can play anything and it should sound good according to this flowchart. Again, there are some hidden conventions about specifically which ones that you should go to, but for our purposes, it's totally fine to just play any of these. So we went from 1, and from 1, we decided to go to 5. Now the chart says that it's totally fine to go from 5 all the way down to 6, and then once we got to 6, 6 only goes to these two here, and we chose to go here. Now, I do want to point something out really quickly if we go back to GarageBand. Now, here we are, and I'm just zooming out. I'm zooming out on my keyboard here. Now, you'll notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 chords here, and sort of revisiting the topic of time, which is crucial to our purposes, we have 4 bars inside of this, what we would call sort of like, I guess, this sequence. And if you look inside of each of these bars, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. That is not a coincidence. There are 4 beats inside of each of these bars, and it turns out that when we get to the end of this, we have sort of restarted, and now it is, prudent for us to go back to our flowchart and sort of look at what might be legal for us to play. And you'll notice that we can go back here to 5, which can go back to 1, but the simple fact that I want to point out is that we are constrained on 2 fronts. We both by what notes sound good after each other, but also where we are in the sequence of time. At the end of this 4th, what we call bar here, it's time for us to sort of think about how to resolve this by either maybe starting over or thinking about what notes we can play next. And the flowchart kind of takes care of that for us, but the division of time here with 4 bars and 4 beats, we would call 4/4 time, and that also does have an effect on what sort of notes we should choose to play. That's a little bit more of an advanced topic that kind of falls outside of the length of this video, but for our purposes here, I did just want to point out that we do have a 4/4 grouping here, and that's sort of a totally legal way to write a sort of small, section of music here, and that's what we've done. So this is it. This is music theory, and this is how we can write some very basic songs. Now, in the context of our web game, or some piece of software application that we might be using, what we've done is we've made use of GarageBand's piano instrument here, but it is possible to use all sorts of different instruments in GarageBand. Each DAW that we may choose to use, there are a huge variety of different types that we can potentially use for our purposes, and each one of them will have all sorts of different effects and sounds and instruments. You can get your own instruments and plug them into these DAWs. GarageBand, the fact that it is as good as it is for a piece of free software allows us to be very, very flexible with it, and we can do some truly incredible things with software like GarageBand, but in the end, when we're writing professional music, it does take, some resources to get different kinds of instruments in. Okay, so I want to show you what I've done here. Now, our goal may have been to start this video, sort of with the objective to create some multimedia assets for a game or for a project that we've, started. And in the sense of that, I'm sort of trying to create something that might match the spirit of that just a little bit more. So We have our sequence of chords that we've written here, and we showed what it sounded like just on a very basic piano, but um, any major DAW or tool such as GarageBand is going to have a collection of instruments, and GarageBand is actually excellent because it has a lot of really high quality um, sounding tools that we can use. So what I've done is I've gone into this section of the instruments and I've selected this instrument here. Now this is just really a matter of sort of personal taste, but in the context of this, I feel like this is a very electronic sounding instrument that might sound good for a video game. So let's actually go ahead and give that a listen and see what it is that we've come up with. Great. I mean, this sounds like a very complete, real sounding piece of music. So let's go ahead and actually take that a step further. Now, if any of us are sort of familiar with the traditional concept of like, a concert band or even just like a rock band or something like that, we all know that bands and, songs generally have different classes of instruments that are present inside of them. And arguably, one of the most important of those is, what we have here, which you could call sort of like the harmony and the melody, but what underlies that is the bass. And so what I've done here is I've added another instrument using this plus sign right here. And GarageBand also gives us a selection of bass synthesizers that we can use. Now, I've chosen this one here just purely based on personal preference and aesthetics, but let's go ahead and take a look, listen, sorry, and see what that sounds like. So now this sort of range is a bit high. Notice that we, in the context of our notes up here, we're actually kind of playing in this range of the C notes right here. So we're filling out, as we would say, the higher range. So what we want to do is actually add some presence to the lower range here. Now, something that I want to go ahead and point out to you is that for this particular instrument right here, you'll notice that we've combined different notes and we've played chords. Now, with certain instruments, we actually don't want to do that, and that's primarily going to be the bass right here. The bass is an instrument that actually does sound much better on its own. So we're not going to play chords with the bass per se. What we're going to do is play individual notes. But here's something that I want to point out. We have chords here. When I play notes that are inside of these chords, we're actually adding to these, and we're creating larger, more complete chords by actually doubling these notes up. And that's totally a thing that we can do as long as we're doing it within a certain range. If I have a bunch of bass instruments and we're all playing this note, that doesn't really add a lot of value to our track, in my opinion. So we're actually going to sort of restrict ourselves to this lower range here, which is what the bass is really meant to fill out. So let's go ahead and see if we can't get a track started here. Okay, and so we're back inside of our canvas here, and what we're going to go ahead and do is start to add notes to this bass instrument to sort of fill our song out. Now remember, from our previous work, what we did was we were working mostly within this range up here of these C notes, and it turns out that these are actually filled out by our instrument. So what we're going to go ahead and do is scroll down on our keyboard, and we're actually going to work in this lower range right here because this is what the bass is meant to fill out. It's a very low instrument, and it's meant to sort of give us a presence in that lower range that our higher instrument didn't fill out. Great. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is let's sort of recall the structure of our song by going back to our chart. Okay, so we're looking at our chart, and we have here the diagram that we were using. So we started at 1, and let's go ahead and just add a 1 in here. So we're in C, and we added 1, so that's going to be this one right here. So Control, and I'm going to go ahead and click. I know you'll notice that sounds very low, and that actually is going to sound really good when we combine it with the other instruments. If it doesn't, we'll sort of play around with it and figure it out, but I have a pretty good feeling about that one. So we're going back to our sequence here, and we started at 1, and then we went to 5. So let's go ahead and add a 5 in. Again, we're not adding full chords, we're just adding individual notes because the bass doesn't actually sound very good as a chord. And in fact, what I might go ahead and do is just play one for you really quickly so we can kind of like understand that. So remember that the chord was just skipping and we use every other note. So let's just go ahead and write that in really quickly. Okay, let's go ahead and play that and see what it sounds like. And in fact, what just happened there is this instrument is actually, now that I think about it, is a mono instrument. And so what mono means in this case is that it's only going to play one note at a time. It's not even going to let us play another note even if we wanted to. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that. And that's actually by design, is because it just sounds so bad that this instrument wasn't designed to even allow it in the first place, right? Great. So we have this. Let's just revisit our flow chart really quickly. We started here, and then we went here to 5. So let's go ahead and go back, and let's add a 5 in. So we have 1, and we're going to go 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's go over here. Control, click, and now we have 5. Let's revisit our flow chart. After we went to 5, the box here says that we can go to 6, and that's what we did. So let's go ahead and add 6 in. Notice that these black squares here, which I pointed out earlier, these are actually corresponding to the black keys. And since we're only worrying about these white keys right here, that's why we're skipping these ones when we write a key in. So we're at 5. Naturally, we might want to think that this is 6, but really this is 6 right here. So control, click. Great. So we have 1, 5, 6. Let's revisit our flow chart. And where does 6 say that we are allowed to go to? 6 says that we're allowed to go to this box here, which includes 4, and that's what we chose. So let's go back. So we're here, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is going to be this. Let's go ahead and add that in right here. Fantastic. And this is our song here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the pencil off. Oh, we're going to slide. I'm going to click done. And then we're back in our song. And you'll see that as we add more instruments, really what we're doing is we're just stacking these up here. And I mean, we can add as many as we want to our heart's desire. Eventually the software will get a little upset because it requires a lot of processing power to play all these instruments at once. However, we can generally add a pretty good amount of instruments that could include drums or choir voices or cool effects or even recordings of other things like nature sounds or people singing or all sorts of different things. But right now we have a bass, and this label on these blocks here is actually wrong. It just was set to the instrument that we started with, but this is again our sort of cool sounding electronic video game synth. So let's go ahead and play the whole thing and see what it sounds like. You'll notice on this synth there's a little bit of a delay that's happening when these notes are hit. This instrument also sounds a little loud, so I'll go ahead and click this here, and this is going to open up our mixer for this instrument. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this volume down just a bit. Let's go check the volume on this one. I already actually turned it down. Actually bring it up a little bit. The pan will tell you, which ear on your headphones or which speaker you want the sound to come out of. That's some advanced mixing that's kind of outside of the scope of this. And we have some little effects that come with this instrument too that are built in. We have an echo and we have a reverb. Let's just turn down the echo just a teensy bit, and let's turn up the reverb just a teensy bit. So reverb, basically it takes your instrument and it just puts it in a giant room. So it makes it sound like, really spacey, as if you were in like a big, like empty hangar, or like a hallway, or a choir hall, or a gymnasium or something like that. So it can be kind of a cool effect if you want to add a lot of space to your sound. Let's go ahead and play it again and see what this sounds like. Cool. And it sounds like, a very cool kind of like, little musical thing that we could use in one of our projects. So the next part of our song that we might want to think about is sort of to round it off is, we've got a good bass here. We've got a nice synth here that's sort of, playing the main sort of melody of our song. But one thing that we might think about that's missing right off the bat is percussion or drums. Now, this part is going to basically show where the importance of time comes in. It's really easy to just sort of play notes like this, sort of, willy-nilly, and just kind of try what sounds good according to the sequence, and you might come out with some really, nice sounding stuff like what we've done here. And there's not a huge emphasis on time because, to be frank with you, there's nothing really driving it. We start with this note, and then when we're done playing it, we move on to this note. But there's nothing that sort of is setting a rhythm for us, like sure, we have a grid, we have our canvas, but like we don't have any other element or any other force that's kind of like telling us when we should be switching notes outside of that. So we're going to go ahead and try to add in some drums here. So I'm going to go down here and click the plus, and right off the bat, we do have a drum instrument right here, and I'm going to click on it, and it brings us this really this is really like a very cool piece of software. Most aren't going to give you this level of quality for free. There's going to be a lot of just, very simple interfaces, but, Apple products in general are very media focused and tend to give you a very nice experience. So most of them aren't going to give you a picture of a drum set, but GarageBand is very nice. So I'm going to go ahead. What you can do is you can kind of see what this sounds like. If we click on the instruments. So it's a very cool drum set. This sounds maybe a little more appropriate for like a rock band or something like that. And what we have here is an electronic song. So let's see if we can maybe find something that fits just a little bit better. And what we'll see here is that GarageBand actually has a section of drums here called electronic. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And there are a few different options here. If you're making a song, best thing you can do is just sort of move through and see what sounds good. I already did in preparation of this, and I found this instrument here, so I'm going to click on it. And this gives us a very different layout from what we just had before. If you'll see, this is kind of like a pad looking sort of configuration, and that's actually intentional. This is sort of resembling an instrument called a drum pad that is very popular for hip hop, and so you'll have a controller with a bunch of little rubber buttons on it that you can sort of program different sounds to, and this is extremely popular instrument used for rap music and hip hop starting kind of like in the 1980s. So we can kind of check out what these sound like. Very different from what we just had before, sort of our fake bongo sound, but what I want to pay attention to is this sound right here. So this is a very nice electronic, what we'd call a kick drum, and it's a kick because you'll see it's operated by a floor pedal here. So I think I'm actually going to roll with this one here. So I'm going to control click right up here, just like we were doing to write the bass and the synth. Going to give us this edit option, and it's going to go ahead and bring us back, but you'll notice that this looks very different. No longer do we have a keyboard, but we have sort of a set of keys resembling that, but instead we have different drum sounds programmed to those. So it plays in the exact same way as the keyboard did. Cool. And if you hold your mouse down, you can kind of go through all of them like that. But so now, here comes the importance of this grid. Okay, so what we look at is we have these little discrete squares here, which are discrete units of time, and we're going to use these to actually insert drum sounds. And this is going to give our song a rhythm. It's going to give us a very predictable sort of driving force of what is sort of telling our music to transition to different sounds and different melodies. These are really two divergent fields. Some people really like to focus on percussion, and that's something that they end up being very good at. Other people like to focus on theory and writing melodies on a keyboard, and that's what they're very good at. and some people are good at both and like doing the whole thing. But um, we're gonna go ahead and kind of just get the whole experience here. So I'm gonna do the same thing I was doing above to insert a note, and I'm gonna try to do it right here. Hit Control. Oh, sorry, my pencil wasn't on. There we go. So I'm gonna hit Control. There we go. And it's going to insert a note right there. Now notice it's very short. I might bump it out. It's not going to actually play this any longer. It's really just easier for me to see and click on. But let's see what happens when I click, hit enter on my keyboard and go back, and then press space. Interesting. Interesting. So we have sort of the beginnings of our drum song, and really the trick now is to figure out where to place these things. I'm just going to stay on this sound right here, but let's go ahead and just kind of play around a bit and see if we can't get an idea of where we should be placing these kicks, right? I'm going to put another one right here because it's the start of our next chord transition. This is where we decide to play different notes, different chords, right? This is where we decided to play the 5 chord. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a drum kick right here. Okay, let's see what that sounds like. Interesting. Okay. So they're spaced a little far apart. Let's go ahead and just sort of count how many beats we have available to us in this. We have 8, right? So based on the fact that this is 8, and based on the fact that we have 4 bars, what we should probably think about doing is working in multiples of 4. So let's not do that, and I'm just going to put one, right here. Okay, let's see what that sounds like. Not horrible, right? It's kind of interesting. Maybe good for like an introductory sort of sequence of our song or something. What my brain really, really wants to happen is for a note to be right here. So I'm going to just put one right here. And while we're at it, I'm just going to put another one right here too. Just following the pattern of what we've already done. And maybe for an introductory sort of sequence, I would leave this here. But in the purpose of this, we're just going to assume we're somewhere in the middle of the song. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just like remove this. Okay. So now we're back at the beginning. Let's see what we've got so far. Interesting. Okay. So let's maybe fill it out a little bit more as if we're creating some sort of like dance track, right? Like we came here for rhythm, and that's what we're going to go ahead and create. So what we want to do is we have a series of 8 notes right here. So we have 1, and then this starts at 1, and this starts at 1. So logically it would make sense to put something somewhere in the middle of these notes. And so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put it right here on this beat, and let's just see what that sounds like. Okay. Okay, great. Still a little bit slow, and so let's try filling this out with every other beat having some sort of drum, and that's sort of corresponding to a style of music called house music, which is a very common style of electronic music, but let's go ahead and do that and see what happens. Oops, put that right there. Okay, let's see what we've got. So what we've done here is we've added in percussion in such a way that we now kind of have like a driving beat to our music. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is just sort of fill the rest of the song out. Oops. And since this is the end right here, I'm going to do something a little fancy. We're going to put something right here, and then right here as well. It's sort of just like a little signal that this is in fact sort of the end of this little 4-bar sequence that we've created. So let's see what this sounds like. Now, we could go ahead and keep going, and in the world of art, this could turn into an entire project where we go through and we shape these sounds and we add more chords and we add more sequences and more voices and instruments. But in the scope of this video and what we've been shooting for this whole time, I think we've generally accomplished. We've shown, let's just review really quickly, based on this diagram here, we can use this to compose music according to a set of rules and create something that sounds pleasing and interesting to the human ear, right? We also showed how we can duplicate an instrument and just focus on the bass notes at the bottom to sort of like fill the sound out a little bit more. What we also did was we showed how to use a percussion instrument to add rhythm to our song that sort of like helps us decide when we should be transitioning between different notes. And through that endeavor, what we did was we came out with a song that sort of follows these rules and conventions and sounds good to the human ear. And so that concludes what I wanted to focus on this video. What I would encourage you to do is go back and look at this chart. Remember, we went 1, 5, 6, 4, and then back to 1. Now, what I would encourage you to do is maybe take some time to go and write some other patterns. Maybe start at 1 and go to 3, and then see what happens when you do that. From 3 you can go to 4, from 4 you can go to 5, and you could even go to 7 if you wanted to, and just see what that sounds like. Different combinations of these things are going to sound different. They create different moods. They create different feelings of the art that you're trying to produce. But generally, this diagram here starts as your very basic formula for how you can write music that sounds good to the human ear. So that concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and we'll potentially see you in another video sometime. Thank you very much for watching.